Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll give people about 2 minutes to filter in, and then we will get started. I have to say, as I watch everyone coming in, it's so amazing to see you all again, at least your names. For those of you who aren't on camera, this is quickly becoming my favorite group of people, and it just makes me so happy to see the same names coming again and again, which means that you are embracing our balance and well-being and professional identity formation community, which I love so very much. And if this is your first time coming in, then thank you. We're so thrilled to have you and to welcome you into this community. And I hope you keep coming back. And there's still some people filing in, so I'll give it just one more minute and then we will get started. Oh my gosh, we broke 100 again. I love this. Every time we have such a fabulous turnout for these, I get so excited and then nervous that, we're not going to be able to do it again. And this is just excellent. So, all right. So thank you, everyone. For coming. Welcome to our third session of the AALS Balance and Wellbeing Section Speed Share series on incorporating the new ABA standards on professional identity formation, cross-cultural competency, and well-being resources. My name is Jordana Confino, and I'm the Senior Director of Professionalism at Fordham Law School. And along with my amazing co-conspirator, Janice Kraft, co-chair of the General Programming Committee of the Balance and Wellbeing Section. And in case I didn't say it enough times, I really just am so thrilled and excited to see you all this afternoon. So welcome and thank you for joining us. Today's session is going to focus on 1L, professional identity formation. And this is just such an important topic because, ready or not, a powerful socialization process starts the second our students walk into law school. And it's really incumbent on us as educators and administrators and champions of law student well-being and professional identity formation and belonging to create, be really deliberate and be really proactive in creating an atmosphere and a learning environment that supports our students' authentic professional identity formation, well-being, and belonging. And we are so lucky to have a fabulous group of panelists today who are going to share their success stories, the lessons they've learned, and amazing resources with you. And then, as always, we'll open it up at the end for Q&A. But before I turn it over to our moderator for today's session, I want to just turn the floor over to the amazing chair of the Balance and Wellbeing Section, Leah Taranova, who has some announcements to share with the group.
Thank you so much, Jordana. I echo your sentiments. It's so wonderful to see so many friendly faces here and to see such great engagement in this program. A huge thank you to the General Programming Committee for pulling this together again and knocking it out of the park again. So I just wanted to share with you all that we are opening up and inviting nominations for our annual section award, which we'll be handing out at the annual meeting. Hopefully we'll see lots of you there in person this year. And it's an award that's designed to honor someone who's made outstanding contributions in the area of well-being and promoting well-being and legal education. The deadline for this is not until the end of the summer, so you have lots of time to get your nominations in. It's August 26th, and I will drop a link into the chat that will bring you to the web form where you can fill out your nominations. So I hope that you all will think creatively on this, on who this would be a great fit for. I know a lot of people are on this call who are deserving of it, so hopefully we'll get lots of nominations. Thanks for your time. I'll turn it over to you, Jordana. Thanks.
Of course. No, I was just thinking, I see 10 people right now who deserve this nomination. So you have no excuse not to submit a nomination. Look around, pick one of these amazing people. You all deserve one yourselves too. So yes, I endorse that message. And one other announcement. So we have 3 more sessions left in our Speech Share series after today. So I am just plopping the topics and the registration links in the chat, so you can go ahead and register for those if you'd like to. And just a reminder that all of our sessions are being recorded. Do come in real time if you can. It's so fun to see you in real time. But if you can't come, the recordings will be available. And also we are recording now, so just heads up about that. And that's it. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this afternoon's program, Professor Jari Peters. And Jari is a professor at the University of Kansas School of Law and a member of the Balance and Wellbeing Section's General Programming Committee. So thank you so much, Jari, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jordana and Leah. Special thanks to Leah, who brought me into this amazing group. And I'm so happy to see all of you, many of you who I know and have been amazing mentors as I'm a junior law professor at KU. So before we start, I just want to provide a little bit of background on the topic. So today's panelists, as Jordana said, will present on the topic of 1L professional identity formation, including the strategies, opportunities, and future developments in this vital area of professional competency in law school curricula. We know that our audience is made up of diverse members in the broader legal educational community. So we anticipated that there may be a broad range of representation, including socio-cultural positionalities, pedagogical perspectives, and fundamental understandings of the professional identity formation standard presented in ABA Standard 303. Before I introduce our first speaker, and with the intention of level setting for our audience, I would like to share a high level and brief background or history on the topic of professional identity formation and the revised ABA standard. In the summer of 2020, we found, as we know, our country rocked by the COVID-19 global pandemic, social unrest, and protest over the police killings of unarmed Black people, including Breonna Taylor, killed by Kentucky policemen on March 13th, 2020, and George Floyd, killed by Minnesota police officer Derek Chauvin on May 25th. In June 2020, 5 law school deans, Angela Owaching-Willing, Kimberly Mutcherson, Carla D. Pratt, Danielle Holly Walker, and Danielle M. Conway launched the Law Deans Anti-Racist Clearinghouse Project on the AALS website. In July of 2020, 150 law school deans signed a letter addressed to the members of the Council of the ABA Section of Legal Education and Admissions to the bar, stating in part, quote, "Preparing law students to be lawyers requires that they should be educated with respect to bias, cultural awareness, and anti-racism. Such skills are essential parts of professional competence, legal practice, and being a lawyer. We believe that every law school should develop such training and education for its students," end quote. It is important to highlight that the dean's letter goes on to state that, quote, "We do not believe that the specific content of such training and education should be mandated by the American Bar Association. Instead, we believe such work should be left to each law school to decide for its students," end quote. In March 2021, Scott Bills and William Adams, respectively the council chair and managing director of accreditation and legal education, sent their memo from the ABA and the ABA standards and rules of procedure, matters for notice and comment on standards 303 and 508 and rules 2 and 3 addressed to interested persons and entities. That memo and its accompanying explanations of revisions included proposed revisions of standard 303 focused on professional identity formation. In the ABA section of legal education and admissions to the bar, report to the House Delegates 4 adopted on February 14th, 2022, the ABA adopted the revisions of several standards, including 303 on curricula. Of those adopted standards, 303B states, in part, quote, a law school shall provide substantial opportunities to students for the development of professional identity, end quote. And 303C states, in part, a law school shall provide education to law students on bias, cross-cultural competency, and racism at the start of the program of legal education and at least once again before graduation, end quote. In a May 2022 National Association of Law Placement, or NALP bulletin by Neil Hamilton and Louis Billionis, the authors discussed the interpretation of Standard 303 and explored several questions related to the standard, including what is a student's professional identity? Interpretation 303-5 emphasizes that professional identity focuses on the social obligations that lawyers have to their clients and society and should involve an intentional exploration of the values, guiding principles, and well-being practices considered foundational to successful legal practice. Interpretation 303-6 adds that the values and responsibilities of the legal profession include the importance of cross-cultural competence to professionally responsible representation and the obligation of lawyers to promote a justice system that provides equal access and eliminates bias, discrimination, and racism in the law. With that high level and brief background, I want to begin our panel with our first speaker, Theodora Pina, Associate Clinical Professor and Director of the Externship Program at Santa Clara University School of Law, who will share her expertise and ongoing experience in helping 1Ls develop their professional identities. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Jordana, very much. And hello, everybody. So a lot of faces I recognize. Happy to be here. Get right into it. I know I'm going to set my timer just to make sure I stay on time. I speak quickly, but in a day like today, it comes in handy because we have 10 minutes and off we go. So let me share my screen. I don't have many slides, but I'm just going to keep us all on the same page. And we're good with seeing that screen? Thank you. Thank you, Jordana. Okay. So awesome. I teach, thank you. I teach, I am the director of the externship program. I teach a first-year professional development course, professional identity course. We have a mandatory course at Santa Clara University. It is a critical lawyering skills course. It's a one-unit course. We started teaching it in spring 2018. So we had a little bit of a jump, I think, at Santa Clara, which is what gave rise to this book that was published in September 2021 by ABA Publishing. I started using this book in the fall of 2018. I wrote a professor's manual in spring of 2020, so that's also published. And there was a student workbook and a professor manual. I'm supposed to talk a little bit. So we have three things that each of us wanted to address, which was a general overview, some cautionary tales, and then how I can be or how we can be a resource to others. My cautionary tale here is that the spring of 2018, the class was a complete disaster. Students hated the class. I hated going to class. I mean, it was just, if you know this, right? I mean, I tell my students they're tougher than any jury that I've ever been in front of. And I've been in front of more than a few juries, but it was awful. And a lot of reasons why, in a nutshell, would be I didn't meet the students, or we didn't meet the students where they were at. I mean, this is a mandatory first year course, and we have about 230 students at Santa Clara. So there were 6 of us trying to teach it in somewhat small section. It was awful. We didn't have a book. We had handouts. First year students don't like handouts. I can guarantee you that. They're used to books, they're used to text, they're used to their doctrinal classes. And so if your class has a lot of handouts, they don't tend to take it seriously. It's my experience anyways. And so writing the book was to address all of these things and to put 230 students on the same page, because now we teach it in small sections. So I have 9 adjunct professors under me. We teach no more than 15 students per section. And I have 18 small sections that I across the entire first year. So I'm able to do that with this book and this book, which is Roadmap. So my book, Essential Learning Skills, is a companion guide to Roadmap. I think Roadmap is a fantastic book. Probably a lot of you are familiar with it. Professional identity formation, getting students to understand what competencies are. They think they know them. Oh, I know what client service is. Oh, I know what cultural competency is. No, they don't, right? Meeting the students where they're at is knowing that they're actually further back in time than you tend to think. I know that was me in spring 2018. My students were not as far along as I just assumed they were. So I had to back up a little bit. And so having Roadmap and having everyone have common definitions, a common starting point, was really, really helpful. And what the workbook does, Essential Learning Skills, is it turns Roadmap into, sort of like a course in a box. So you can pick up these 2 books and run. And that's what my adjuncts were able to do. And everything I think is sales. I tell my students the same thing. I think part of my presentation here for you is sales too. So this is actually my newest adjunct professor. She just started teaching with me. Carol Spring was her first class that she taught. She teaches 2 sections, 2 small sections, 15 students each. And this is her course evaluations. Students like the class. And that's really important because I hated going to class in spring 2018. I didn't want to hate to go to class anymore. I didn't want my students hating to go to class. And there's also the question of how much of your students are learning if they're not taking in the material, right? If they're not open to the material, how much of it are they actually digesting? So the course works, not just because I think it works, but I actually get these evaluations back for me and for all of my adjuncts. What do we teach? So 303B, so Jari started us off really helpful, right? So she gave us the development of the professional identity standards for the ABA. And you have to develop a professional identity. And what is that? And so for me, I take it as we already know what that is. Like we don't have to guess, to me, we don't have to guess what we should teach because there are 4 main studies that have been done. And there are others. You can go to McCrate, you can go to some of these other studies, but these are the 4 sort of big ones, I suppose you could say. Schultz-Zedek goes back a little bit, but I think it's one that most of my clinical colleagues anyways are familiar with. So I took from Schultz-Zedek, Foundations for Practice, Roadmap, which is Neil Hamilton, of course, and then Building a Better Bar. That was the last study done by AALS in 2020. And collectively, these studies probably are somewhere around 40,000 attorneys in all practice areas, right? Big law, small firms, solo practice, nonprofits, everything in between. So I get to tell my students, here are the competencies that you need to learn, not just because I think so, but their chances are your future boss thinks so too. And that tends to get their attention because it's not just something I think is important, because at that point they're like, who are you and why do I care what you have to say? I'm able to say, listen up, I practiced law for 12 years and I do think these are important. I had junior attorneys under me and I agree. But your future boss also thinks these are important. And these are the competencies that you need to know to be successful as a first-year lawyer. And I tell my students that no matter what background or what they have or don't have in common is one else, the one thing that I am absolutely sure is that they will all start as first-year associates. And so we know those specific legal skills or the foundational aspects of character needed to get started. We know what they are because they've been identified for us. And so what I've done within my book is I've taken these 4 aggregate studies. And of course, there's a lot of overlap, as you would expect, between them. And these are the top 10 foundational character competencies. These are the top 10 that these 4 studies collectively have identified as the most important for first-year lawyers to be successful. And so I'll tell my students that what we're going to do in class is we're going to concentrate on the 7 that you see in bold. And as you know, I'm sure, right, the 7 have to do with foundational character. And these are just tend to be what's not taught in law schools. So it works out really well because analytical skills, law knowledge, in their doctrinal courses, they're going to be able to work on what's in gray. And in our class, we're going to work on what's in black. And so that's what my book is. I have a chapter on each one of these competencies. It's on your feet. We have scenarios, so forth and so on. And we practice each one of these competencies for each class. As you know, 303B also says that you have to do a few things in addition, which is professional identity must also include values, right, and well-being practices. Interestingly, out of those 4 studies, none of them have identified, practicing lawyers do not identify wellness or well-being as a top 10 competency. Not surprising, right? We didn't learn any of that in law school. So it may be on their radar, but it does not bubble to a top 10. It is in the book. I thought it was important before the ABA came up with this. I think we all think it's important because we have a profession that's really not well. I love my little guy. He's in the book, my little guy. I always tell my students, I comb the internet trying to find interesting pictures for them. So he's in the book, and not to end up one of these little gentlemen right here, what I think is the issue is practicing wellness. And wellness for me is a competency. Everything is a competency. So if you're utilizing your skills, values, and interests, chances are you're going to be well. If you like what you do, if you're practicing in an area that if you're gaining skills, we know this, right? Autonomy, we know, I mean, Larry Krieger has a lot of information on this and he's quoted in the book too. And by the way, everything that I'm telling you is in the book. It's footnoted. I'm just avoiding all of that or ignoring all that just for purposes of my presentation. But everything is footnoted and documented in the book. It's data driven and it's rubric driven too. Those are the two things that I rely on heavily in the book. So wellness is a competency. And if you align your skills, values, and interests to the practice of law, you're going to be well. So why your interests matter is because when you don't have an alignment of skills, values, and interests, chances are that you're going to end up unwell. And again, I have a whole presentation on that in the book, including the citations for that. And then the other part we know is that a professional identity must also include cross-cultural competence. This is in the book too. So this is classes 2 and 4, because the book is, it's on your feet. It includes homework. It's all, like I said, sort of one-stop shopping. So for cultural competence or cultural intelligence, it takes 2 classes. You have an assignment that you get or receive in class 2, and then you have to do something, and then you have to come back to it and revisit it and talk about it again in class 4. Neil Hamilton has a wonderful chapter on, not chapter, but a wonderful section on cultural intelligence, on what it is and why it's important. So the students are grounded in cultural intelligence from his perspective within the book. And then what I've done in the book is I've expanded the definition, and I'm going to say I'm certainly not diminishing the definition that Neil uses or that any of you perhaps use. You can use that definition. And also I think we need to expand the definition of cultural intelligence or cultural competence, because we can see here, and again, all these statistics, everything is in the book, but the graph you see on your left there is that in 2018, according to the ABA, 85% of attorneys in the United States identify as white, Black/Caucasian. And we don't have any good data, or at least I couldn't find any good data on the makeup of clients, on the culture or the client race. But what we do know is that, and again, it's all documented, but the majority of clients, unless you're in certain practice areas, majority of clients are going to be white also. And that just goes to the demographics of money, and money or wealth in the United States is held by majority by white Americans. So I just wanted to debunk some myths and say, why do we need cultural competence? It may not be because you're going to need it in practice. A lot of us, I know I practiced for 12 years and I could count on one hand the number of clients of color that I had. And I worked in a major city, and I never worked with or for an attorney of color in 12 years. And again, the demographic information that we have will back that up, that you might not have a lot of diversity within the law, depending on the type of law that you practice. But you can define cultural competence as effective lawyering. It's one of the same. And what Neil does for us in his book, again, he has a really nice chapter on it. On the left, you'll see that he defines competencies. Again, everything is a competency for me. And you really need to be culturally competent to be an effective lawyer. And the competencies you see on the left are the ones that Neil identifies in his book as being necessary to have cultural competence. And the competencies that you see on the right are the ones identified by Schultz-Zedek, Building a Better Bar, and Foundations for Practice. Those are the competencies you see to be an effective lawyer. So they're one and the same. So I'll tell my students that to be a good lawyer, by definition, means you are going to be able to be culturally competent, because those same competencies come into play. They're not separate, they're not distinct, they're one and the same. So again, I think, I say everything is sales. Everything for me is to get my students buy-in, to get them to take to the class, to figure out what they're learning, why they're learning it, to use rubrics, to use a data-driven model to get cultural competence across. So that's my first year lawyering class. How did I do? I think I came in under my 10 minutes.
Thank you, Theodora. So we have our next speaker. If you're ready,
Hi
Erica.
there. I'm here. Let me share my screen with everybody here. Okay. Oh, excellent. Technology in business. So far, so good. I'm Erica Pont from GW Law School. It's so nice to see all of you. I have about 10 minutes to chat with you about incorporating professional identity formation into your traditional or existing 1L legal research and writing curriculum. As some of you know, we've been doing exactly that at GW Law School since 2019 when we launched our Fundamentals of Lawyering program. So in the last 5 years, or our last 4 years, as we enter our 4th year, we've had a lot of opportunity to do what we suggest our students do, which is self-reflect on our experience integrating professional identity formation into the legal research and writing curriculum. And I'm delighted to share with you today some of the lessons we've learned over the last 4 years, the good, the bad, and the ugly, what we found works and why, what we found works less well and why, in the hopes that those of you who are thinking as you're implementing 303 that the legal research and writing classroom might be a place you want to consider. I hope that the experience that we've gained in the last 4 years might help you be intentional about how you might do so and what you might face when you start to incorporate these concepts into the required 1L curriculum. So lesson learned number 1, I think there's reason for great optimism. We were very hopeful that legal research and writing would be the appropriate home for concepts around professional identity formation. And I think we found the answer to does this work in the 1L LRW classroom? I think the answer is a pretty resounding and unequivocal yes. So we're excited, I think, about this as a possibility. So just out of curiosity, I was hoping to conduct a very lo-fi poll in the chat about how many people in our audience of 131 have some responsibility either for legal research and writing programming as part of their required LRW class or teach legal research and writing in like a required legal skills class. You could just pop a yes or a hi in the chat. I just wanted to get a sense for how many folks I had. Oh, and I see some familiar names. Okay, great. So at least some folks in the audience who have some exposure to this already. And my suspicion is that these concepts will be very familiar to some of you. So part of my reasons for optimism is that if you want to really get professional identity formation out in front of all of your 1Ls, legal research and writing has the advantage of being a pre-existing required class in every law school. So it's a great way as you're incorporating 303 to make sure you're touching all of your incoming 1Ls without the sort of institutional investment of a required professionalism or professional identity formation course. If you have the momentum for that in your institution, great. But if you don't, LRW can be a really nice way to house some of these concepts that we need to get out through 303. It also has the added advantage of being a required class. So again, to the point of touching every single 1L, it already exists, it's already required. So it's a great kind of infrastructure to start thinking about exposing students to professional identity formation. Perhaps most importantly, and to our great sort of joy, the foundation is really already there for professional identity formation in the LRW classroom. In fact, I suspect many of the folks in this audience are already teaching concepts around professional identity formation, even if they're not explicitly calling them that. And some of the reasons that LRW is so conducive to professional identity formation are worth kind of thinking about for a second. Beyond the fact that it's pre-existing and required, LRW classrooms tend to be small and really interactive. And in our experience, introducing students to professional identity formation concepts works best when it's an interactive experience in a small environment where there's a lot of trust, where students feel comfortable, being vulnerable, doing some self-assessment about their own values and skills. And that environment really already exists and is cultivated really well in the LRW kind of classroom. I think most people who teach LRW have already shied away from giving students untethered legal research and writing prompts and saying, just go forth and write them. I think to a certain degree, and in some classrooms to a very high degree, LRW classrooms are already really leaning into this idea of experiential learning and client role play. So if you're thinking about creating an opportunity for a student to function as though they are in a client service environment, we're already really doing that in LRW. When we say, write a memo on behalf of a client, that infrastructure is really right for then interrogating to a student or for a student, what does that mean to you to be in service of a client? Other two related points, LRW as a sort of curricular matter is often taught through a coaching approach. And when we think about a best practices approach to teaching professional identity formation concepts, I think most people would agree that it's not really taught at all. It's curated and coached or seated and reflected or the other concepts I've seen. And that's really similar to the way legal research and writing is taught. You don't typically teach through entirely lecture format. Here's what makes great writing. Instead, you have to create opportunities for students to create their own good writing, provide feedback, allow the student to self-reflect, and then for the student to try again. So that sort of culture is already really imbued in the LRW curriculum. Finally, LRW already encourages self-directed learning, which we know is a really big part of professional identity formation, in that anyone who teaches LRW has probably experienced a student who says, just tell me how to write it, just tell me how to get the A. And you have to say to that student, well, I can't do that. You're going to have to learn along the way. And some of that learning is going to be self-directed about what you already know skill set wise and where the gap is between the skills that you have and the skills that you need. So all of this lays a really nice foundation for professional identity formation in the classroom. The other lesson we learned, and I hope that this is music to your ears, is you don't have to completely reinvent the wheel. You can build on what's already in your curriculum. In fact, I would suggest if this is the first time you're intentionally curating your curriculum around professional identity formation, you can keep all of your major existing LRW assignments, but you can make some really simple framing tweaks to invite students to engage in professional identity formation opportunities. You can remind students, as I suspect we often do, that a writing assignment doesn't exist in a vacuum. And that's, I think, a problem with the way LRW has been taught historically in the distant past. And I think we've self-corrected that as a discipline. But even reminding students that when they approach any writing assignment, either in your class or out in practice, that the questions they should be asking themselves include, who is the client? I mean, it's obvious to all of us as educators that no legal research and writing assignment occurs in a vacuum. It's been generated by a client request to the lawyer for advice or information, but that may not be obvious to your student. It's worth pointing out. What are you doing? Who is your client? What is the client asking? And how would you communicate what the client needs to know? So this very intentional framing around client service and client service orientation is already going to level up your existing LRW curriculum into an opportunity for professional identity formation. The other thing that we've learned is it's really helpful to keep students in that role as lawyer advisor throughout the semester. We assign students, all 1L students, to a particular law firm at GW, and the student maintains that identity throughout the fall semester. And some of them resist that role play at first. They think, oh, this is silly. What are we doing? But it allows you to curate experiences in a safe environment where the student has to make independent judgment. They really have to think about, okay, if I were out in the real world, how would I be addressing my client, and what sort of advice would I offer them? Another thing that we've learned that's really helpful is to expand the realistic client ecosystem as much as you can. We work, just as we work with the same law firm all semester, we work with the same client all semester, and we really try to bring this client to life. The client has a website, the client leaves voicemails, the client comes in to meet with the students, sometimes with no particular agenda. So providing as much of a realistic kind of client portfolio as you can possibly provide to your students is really helpful. And then really pressing them on what matters to your client besides just the sheer legal research and writing advice you're giving them. Are they taxed, by COVID? Are they just so stressed out that they don't want to litigate this matter? Do they have a pending merger? Are they hard up financially? Are there other sort of client considerations that you can build into your client ecosystem that really encourages your student to be more holistic about the way they approach client service? This one's a biggie. Build in as many opportunities for formal and informal self-reflection as you can. And I think when we launched the program, we made the mistake of being a little bit rote about what constituted a self-reflection. There was a little bit of a tendency to just do like a one-pager or a Google form saying, what did you learn? What will you do different next time? I think you can really maximize your self-reflection opportunities to ask the student what they've learned along the way, and also get some insight into how they're doing. How is their mental health? Was a particular assignment really stressful for them? If so, why? How did they work through that experience? It's also helpful for you to understand how the curriculum is resonating with your students. So the self-reflection provides the opportunity for the student to engage in their own professional identity formation, but it also helps you to figure out how your curriculum is landing. And to pick up on a concept I think you're going to hear a lot today with my final minute, it's really crucial to generate student buy-in. I think if we made a mistake in the first year, and we made many, I don't know that we had sufficient student buy-in about what it is that we were trying to teach. So we got a lot of, oh, they're doing all of this extra stuff in legal research and writing, and it's ungraded and it doesn't matter, and how is it going to help me? So I would suggest to you that framing is your friend. I would make things as explicit as you can in your course learning objectives, and really engage with the student about, here is why we have these learning objectives here. And to the extent you can, I try to tether my professional identity formation learning objectives to an existing written or oral assignment, so it doesn't just clunk for the student as an independent module. Instead, they understand how it's connected to the ARC. And I would say, if you can think broadly about what constitutes a written or oral assignment, that would help you. Emails to partners, PowerPoint presentations, self-reflection, any of that on which they're getting feedback is a written assignment that I think is sufficient to get student buy-in. And explain directly, and this is a point that was already made, so I won't belabor it, why this matters. It doesn't just matter because I tell you it matters. I love to flash up this slide for my students, compare it to the learning objectives, and show them all of the things that they are learning that is actually going to help them in their career and that their employers are looking for too. So it's really this last bucket of client-focused orientation that I think is a relatively light lift for you to imbue in almost every aspect of your 1L legal research and writing program. And with that, I am out of time, but I'm delighted to answer any questions that you have, either in the Q&A portion or after the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Erica. We have our next presenter, Francie Scott, and of course, we'll have Q&A once all of our presenters have finished. Thank you.
Great, thanks. I am Francie Scott. I'm the Assistant Dean for Career and Professional Development at Wake Forest Law School. And I will go ahead and share my screen. Okay. I'm gonna give a brief overview of the course and then really kind of drill down on a couple of specific concepts that we cover. We have been teaching this 1L professional development class for about 8 years now. It was approved in 2013 by the faculty. It's a year-long 1-credit course. The students receive a letter grade that is not actually factored into their GPA. And then it meets about once a week over the course of 2 semesters. as I mentioned, we have a 1L enrollment of about 160 a class. So we meet in 8 sections of about 20 students. And there are 4 of us who are career counselors in the Office of Career and Professional Development. All of us are JDs, all of us are attorneys with practice experience. So each of us teaches 2 sections of the class. And the 3 primary components are really kind of focused around, I forgot to set my timer, focused around understanding somebody tell me, somebody give me a wave. Understanding the profession. So really, I mean, it's coming out of the career office. So what are the options? What are the career options, career paths for JD graduates? Dory, I think, talked about the key professional competencies. This is big. Understanding what is it that lawyers really need to be good at in order to be successful professionals. And we use similar, we use the Foundations for Practice study, which is really illuminating for students. The Schultz and Zedek factors as well. And we talk about I like the T-shaped lawyer and the Delta model are a couple of other sort of formulations that we present to students. In sort of the professional identity arena, those are, I guess, the competencies that we've already sort of discussed: the self-awareness, the well-being and mental health, the emotional intelligence piece, and the cross-cultural competency that we try to formulate. And then we have a component on job search skills. We talk about resumes, cover letters, interviewing, and the way we've got it structured, the arc of the course aligns closely with the timeline for student job searching. So, we introduce sort of career options and career paths, and then we talk about self-assessment and awareness and competencies. And then as we're getting into sort of the end of the fall, beginning of spring, we're drilling down on job search skills. So I think it is highly valuable to have career services professionals involved in this course. I think that, on one side, we have 1 foot in academia and 1 foot in the profession. We're still very much engaged with employers and can really kind of, speak with great authority to, this is what employers are looking for. These are the expectations you're going to have when you go into the profession, as well as kind of trends in the market and things like that. And then, as far as fostering buy-in, I mean, I don't know about all of your law schools, but our students are very concerned about jobs. So it's something that there's sort of a natural, like, okay, I'm going to listen because I want to get a job out of this. So, just kind of capitalizing on that tendency is very helpful. So that's the big overview. To address a couple of the areas of professional identity, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the tools that we've used over the last 8 years. For self-assessment, we start here in the fall, trying to help students think through, what am I good at? I think Dory mentioned that I like to use the phrase, the intersection of your skills, values, and interests. And if you don't know what those are, you're not going to be able to pursue them. So the self-assessment tools can be really, really valuable. I also, we used StrengthsFinder. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's a little bit broader. It's not law specific. One of the things I like about it is it comes from positive psychology. And so it's really this strengths-based approach where we do have a lot of students who kind of come, I think this is across the board, that imposter syndrome and that feeling like, well, I don't really have anything to offer. I don't have any experience. I don't have this. And StrengthsFinder helps, put you in a different place and think from what is it that I do bring to the table and how do I set myself apart? Also just understanding kind of how you work best and helping align that, your skills with your opportunities. So that is one assessment we've used in the course. We've also used LawFit, which is much more specific on, practice areas and legal careers. It actually gives students a list of what practice areas might be a good fit. One of the pros is that it's very straightforward. It's just a straightforward list of practice groups and helps students really narrow down kind of options to explore. It doesn't really get at a lot more of the kind of working styles and things like that. And then the last assessment that we've used more recently is the attorney assessment. It's much more comprehensive, almost too comprehensive, frankly, because it's really overwhelming sometimes for students. It uses multiple personality assessments to sort of give a broad picture of, you know, your identifying characteristics, like what are your kind of key qualities, and then how do they align with the general attorney population? So that's really interesting for students to see. How do you engage with others? What's your effective working style? And again, how that compares to the general attorney population, as well as kind of work environments and your core values. And it gives some general guidance on practice areas, but overall, it just gives a big picture overview of, you know, kind of where you fit as compared to generally attorneys in the profession, which can give students some really interesting insights. A couple of thoughts on self-assessment tools is that you have to be really careful with them. Like, you cannot just tell a student to take this quiz or take this test and send them off on their own. You really need to engage them in discussion and reflection on the outcomes of these tools. So one of the first things students really love to do is question the accuracy. Like, they'll take an assessment and they'll come in and say, this doesn't really sound like me, I think it's wrong. And so you have to explain to them, like, this is a validated assessment. You're the one who answered the question. So it's not that it's wrong. It's just maybe that you don't really, and you have to say this diplomatically, but maybe you don't know yourself as well as you think you do. Because they're not, I mean, these are valid tools that have been tested. So that tends to be something that we have to talk with students about. You also need to, like, it really helps to focus on understanding the skills and strengths and what they mean, and also kind of how students translate them. Particularly StrengthsFinder kind of uses some terms of art that you really want to kind of talk with a student through, you know, what does that really look like in practice? What does that look like for you? And then again, back to that job search piece, you know, how do you articulate that to a potential employer or to a person that you're working with? Also ensuring that students understand this is just one piece of the puzzle. None of these assessments are determinative. None of them, you don't come in and say, okay, this says I'm going to be this, so therefore I've completed that process. The idea is really just using these as a starting point to help narrow focus, and back to that kind of thinking about, you know, underpinning all of this is you want to approach the process, the professional identity formation process from an internal place, not based on what other people are telling you should want or you should do. And so that kind of helps set the table for that. The second piece or competency that we talk about is that cross-cultural competency, emotional intelligence, diversity piece. And we have approached this in a lot of different ways over 8 years, some effective and I think some not so effective. More recently, I think this probably is our most successful. We have a class titled Emotional Intelligence and Diversity. Again, foundational skills for global leaders, kind of putting it in that place of like, these are competencies that you want to have as a lawyer. And again, you know, the tail end of that piece is these are skills that can be learned. You know, there's like, this is a competency you need, and this is something that can be learned. There are obviously students who are probably coming more highly emotional, with, you know, highly developed sense of emotional intelligence. But I always ask my students, you know, to come to class with the mindset of there's always something to learn. And I think that's really important. So we talk about how lawyers typically have above average intelligence, but honestly don't necessarily score as highly on the emotional intelligence. But relationships are really critical to effective law practice. So, you know, the more you can kind of build a keen level of emotional intelligence, the more effective you're going to be in multiple capacities. So we talk a little bit about like specific ways to actually develop emotional intelligence. And then that sets the table, and we go into some real world scenarios, break into small groups. And these are just two examples. We've pulled them from various, honestly, from real world situations that have come up, and break the students into groups, and then, you know, have each of them discuss and then bring it back for feedback. And we found the students very willing to engage. You need to feel comfortable with the topic. You need to be prepared, to facilitate a thoughtful discussion. But the students were actually hungry for this. So we had some really good conversations. I would say the one pitfall that I saw with a couple of students who were sort of almost being too careful, the second scenario, one of my students kind of came back and said, oh, no one here would ever say anything like that. Like, we don't really think this is possible. And I had to kind of call them out and say, that's a nice thought, but that's not always the case. And frankly, you have to realize in the professional world that you're going to have to navigate differences, that you're going to come across people who say things that you disagree with or that you find offensive. And, you need to think through how you're going to handle that situation. So you can't just kind of let them say, I don't think that would ever happen. And then the final competency is this mindset and well-being piece. And this has been really interesting because I come from, after practice, I went and got a master's in social work. And in social work, everybody talks about self-care. Everybody's like super bought into the idea. And I have not found that law students really like to hear about it, particularly, frankly, at the very beginning of law school. So we kind of decided to sort of weave in these different pieces at different times when we thought that they would be receptive to it. So the way I introduced the topic early in the semester, in the first semester, is really talking about productivity. My class is Strategies for Success in Law School. And I give them, sort of the idea that, frankly, I give them the brain science behind it. And this is a very unscientific way of explaining. I'm sure that I have neuroscience majors who just cringe when I bring up this slide. But kind of talking about how, managing stress effectively makes you more productive. So this is not about powering through and never sleeping and subsisting on coffee and, whatever, caffeine pills. Like, taking care of yourself actually makes you more effective. And that has been, I think, a useful way to introduce the topic and get students kind of thinking from that point of view about well-being and how to be effective as a student. And then obviously the habits that you are developing in law school are going to carry over into practice. Later on in the semester, then we talk about resilience. Usually comes in kind of January, February timeframe. They've gone through one semester of law school. They've gotten their grades back. For a lot of them, it's one of the first setbacks that they've had in their lives. And so we really kind of try to address that. And again, thinking of resilience as a key professional skill, and then offering some specific ways to build resilience, reframing unproductive thinking, cultivating relationships, and then kind of understanding the difference, understanding that whole, like, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. And a couple of specific ways we have found a really effective tool is storytelling. So we've tried to kind of harness the power of storytelling in a couple of ways. Students really hearing stories from other students really resonated with them. So we kind of started collecting stories, students who were willing to share with us. We collected stories, written electronic, like a paragraph, tell me about your experience. And we'd write a paragraph and we have this online career planning guide that we have those stories. Some of them are attributed, some of them are anonymous, and it's a password protected site. So, it's really only available to our students. And then my colleague, who is really into podcasting and has a really great kind of presence, started doing podcasts. And so he does brief, like 20-minute interviews with students and alums talking about challenging situations. He covers other ground as well, but that's one. And then we share these with students as assignments in the class. So that they really kind of hear other people's experience and learn from that. And again, that goes to, sort of developing empathy and the emotional intelligence piece, as well as the mindset piece.
Thank you, Francie. So we have our next presenter. Eric, if you're ready.
I am, thank you. Okay. So thank you all very much for being here. It's a pleasure to be with you all. And it is super cool, I have to say, to hear the great things that my co-panelists are doing. Hopefully you're seeing areas of overlap and consistency in what we're describing, and also some areas of divergence. I'm going to talk about, and I've started my timer, I am going to talk about this super exciting topic of designing a first-year professional identity course, or even a series of workshops. And hopefully I'm going to say a couple of things that you haven't heard already. Just a tiny bit of context. We have taught professional identity as a required course at Texas A&M for 7 years. And we teach it across the full academic year. It's 1 credit, and I have some of the other details there, but also my contact information is there. I would love to connect with you if you're thinking about designing a professional identity course for 1Ls, or you're thinking about sharpening your course. I think it would be fantastic to have a community of people who are working on that particular topic in that subject area. So please feel free to reach out. I'd love to connect with you. So if you are going to be teaching a first-year class on professional identity, once you figure out what the phrase professional identity means for you and your institution, which, you know, there's some agreement out there on what that means, and there's also some disagreement. So what does professional identity mean for your institution? Then you're going to have to figure out what topics you're going to cover in your course and what the sequencing or timing of that's going to be. When we first started teaching this class, I literally I read a lot of books and articles. I found syllabi, and I wrote every possible subject that I could cover in professional identity out on an index card, and I put them all out on my kitchen counter. And I had like 30 or 40 cards. And literally what I did is I went through and I kind of separated them into 2 big piles of sort of importance. And that was based on what I thought, based on my experience in the practice of law and what I knew about what the students were getting in their other classes. My perspective then was, what topics do I need to cover? What do I need to teach the students? And over the semesters teaching professional identity, another way of looking at this process of design has sort of come out to us. And I think it's a much better approach. So instead of thinking about what I need to cover in the professional identity course, I'm thinking more about what is it that the 1Ls need to hear at particular times during the academic year. And so with that framework, I've really started thinking about pillars of our professional identity course. So a pillar, for our purposes, connects. A pillar connects where the 1Ls are at in the academic year with really core professional identity subject matter and competencies. And if you do that and you do it right, you do it well, then it resonates and the students pay attention and they care about it. If you do it poorly, and we've certainly done that some in the past, then the students tune out, because this is so different than the other classes that they're taking. So we teach this class over the course of 2 semesters. I have just some of the subject matters that we cover, basically roughly kind of in relation to each other there. I'm not obviously going to talk about all of this, but a number of our modules are pillars as I've defined it. But I want to talk about 2 in particular, one in the fall and one in the spring. So first, in the fall, about a third of the way through the fall semester, where are the 1Ls at? They're completely immersed in their classes. They're briefing, they're doing outlines, they're prepping for midterms, they're doing writing assignments, they're getting feedback, they're feeling not as smart as they've always felt. And they've got their eye on this future possibility of jobs, which is kind of bewildering. They're not really sure where they want to fit into the practice of law. They're not really sure that they can compete with their classmates for jobs. They're not really sure what legal employers want. They're not really sure who they are. And we work with our career services office on this material, but I'll tell you that my experience is that students are really hyper-focused on what's happening in the classroom. So if you can talk about this stuff in the classroom, as opposed to just career services workshops, I think it's a little bit more helpful. So over the course of a couple of classes, we talk about this pillar of creating a unique narrative. And that really involves 2 separate areas of focus. First, we have found that our students can't answer the question, what kind of law do you want to practice? What setting do you want to practice in? Because they don't know what lawyers do. And so we really do find that, that giving students a sense of practice areas, practice settings, skills lawyers use, advantages, disadvantages of different kinds of jobs, that's really helpful in helping students figure out how they might enter this world. We then ask students in this module to reflect deeply about their passions, their strengths, their goals, why they want to practice law, what kind of life they want to live, and how law might help them achieve their broader life goals. Once we have that foundation, we then turn to actually designing a narrative. So the students are pushed to do this themselves, but we really help them with that. And this is drawn largely from the roadmap book, some of Neil Hamilton's writings. But we ask students to take a look at all of their educational experiences, work experiences, volunteer work, sports, arts, even things that they've done with their family. If they've worked to help support their family or taken care of their younger siblings, for example, and to distill down from all of those great experiences, their core competencies, 3 to 5 competencies that are really their strengths. And by going through that process, what we're able to do is help students answer the question, why should I hire you? What's different about you when those students interview? And the culmination of this process is a mock interview. All of our 1L students are required to do a mock interview with our TAs. And the questions the TAs ask are very typical interview questions, but they press on this idea of narrative. I would say that this is a really transformative part of a lot of students' experiences in the first year, because they move from being a real outsider, seeing law as that thing that's out there in the distance, to feeling like they're actually in the circle of law. They feel like they've entered the profession because they can talk about competencies and they can talk about how they might make an employer's life easier, for example. The competencies that we emphasize with this pillar are a lot of self-awareness, self-reflection. We talk about self-direction. We talk about seeing the world from another person's perspective. Here, it's going to be the employer who's judging the student and evaluating the student. And of course, effective communication skills are critical in this stage. The second and last pillar that I want to talk about is the very last thing that we do in our professional identity class. Where are the 1Ls at the very end of the 1L year? Well, they're completely focused on final exams. They're implementing changes maybe they made after the fall semester. Most of our students have jobs, but they don't really understand how that job might fit into the bigger picture for them or how it fits into their law school experience. They're also about to register for fall 2L classes, and they're not really sure how their 2L and 3L experiences fit into their 1L experience either. So the very last session that we have in professional identity is a class on their professional development beyond their 1L year. And we talk about jobs and we talk about academic advising. So first, jobs. We get the students thinking very strategically about that summer experience. Don't just wander in and have a random experience and walk out. Instead, set some goals for yourself. What do you want to achieve? Are there competencies you want to develop? Are there skills you want to develop? Do you want to make sure that yes, you in fact do want to do criminal law? Or are you looking at maybe new practice areas that you haven't considered? You want to be able to evaluate those in a real way. Walk out of that summer experience knowing more about yourself. Also walk out of that summer experience with a broadened network of professionals that you can continue to build in the future. Having already talked about narrative, we tell the students that they need to be able to take that summer experience and supplement and complement that narrative so that when they interview in the fall of their second year, they have a more well-developed story to tell about themselves. The second part of this professional development beyond the 1L year is academic advising. And this is what I'm most excited about. We just started this last year, and I think it worked pretty well. We have taken, I have to say this quietly, we have taken academic advising away from our faculty, and we have given it to our professional identity TAs. So the academic dean does an overview session with all of our 1Ls, and then the 1Ls are given materials to read and some worksheets to go through. And then every 1L has to meet with their professional identity TA for 30 minutes. And they have to go through a lot of really kind of basic ideas of what courses do you want to register for, what are your backup courses? Are you interested in a concentration? Why? How are you going to sequence that? Are you going to do a clinic? When are you going to do a clinic? Why are you going to do that clinic over other clinics? The TAs don't approve schedules, but they do push the 1Ls to think deeply about why they're making certain choices and making sure that those choices fit into a broader plan of professional development. I will also, as soon as I get off, I can't do it while I'm talking because I'm not that talented, but when I finish, I will post in the chat the checklist that our TAs use in that advising meeting in case it's helpful for you and your institutions. The competencies we talk about in this last session involve a lot of strategy. What are your goals and how are you going to use these opportunities in front of you to develop your existing competencies, new competencies, and help you achieve your goals? We also talk to the students explicitly about taking responsibility for their professional development, that's a life skill. They're going to have to continue to implement that going forward. Also, an important life skill and lawyering skill is discernment. They're going to get conflicting information about course selection. They're going to get conflicting information about what is the best job to take. And they're going to have to navigate through that and figure out which bits of information to take on and to adopt and implement. So finally, I would say that this idea of a pillar approach in a professional identity course has a lot of value. Again, when we do it well, it works great. And sometimes we don't do it well, and we can tell that the course isn't resonating as much with the students there. But when it works well, the students know that you care about them, they start to trust you, and also you help them feel like they have become a part of the profession, even though they're just in the first year of law school, that this is beginning the journey to being an actual practitioner in law. So again, my contact information is there. I would love to connect with you if you have any questions or just want to brainstorm about a 1L class. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Eric. We have our last presenter, Linda, if you're ready.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all. So I'll try to be quick, and I'll try not to repeat anything that anybody said, because these presentations have all been great. And I think that there's a lot that we all agree on and that we all share. But I guess I want to sort of focus a little bit on what we are particularly doing at Fordham, give you a little overview of our program, and particularly focus on, I was asked to talk about the role of upper level students in the 1L experience. So I want to specifically focus on how our upper level students participate. And then in keeping with the structure of this evening, well, I guess it's afternoon, I'm in Europe, so it's evening here, some advice and how we might be a resource for other schools. So the important thing about our 1L curriculum is that we don't have an official professional identity formation course. Our students are already at the ABA maximum in their number of credits, and the faculty really has no taste for curriculum reform at the moment. And so our last war over the 1L curriculum wasn't really that long ago, and the scars remain. And so we weren't really interested in trying to go that route. When I became Associate Dean for Academic Affairs in 2017, what I tried to do was think about what we could do that would touch all students without requiring a faculty vote. And this is really what we came up with. So there are these three different pieces to our 1L professional identity development curriculum. So August orientation seemed an obvious place to get students started with professional identity development. But we know that students are nervous, overwhelmed, and don't know each other yet at that time. So it's not a great time to do a lot of the things that we really need to do with them, the things that require that they be vulnerable with each other. And we also know that they're not going to remember very much of what happened during that time. So we focus on helping them think about how they can bring their values, their experiences, their strengths into their law school journey, and into their future lives as lawyers. And we work on starting to create a sense of community. That's a really important part of what we do in our professionalism programming. We know that students at that time are trying to make friends, they're getting used to a new environment. And so we really try to start lightly in August. And then follow up in a more serious way in our 2-day January orientation. So the goal of our August orientation is to make students feel happy that they came to law school, but then we really try to delve deeper when we get to January. So we originally introduced January orientation for diversity, equity, and inclusion programming, and we still spend 1 full day on DEI. It's a good time to talk about belonging because students are ready to have more personal, more honest conversations with each other than they were in August. So the second day is devoted to what we call professionalism programming. And we designed it really around sort of what Francie was talking about too, the emotions that students have after their first semester. So many of them are disappointed in their first semester grades. And so January really emphasizes growth mindset and overcoming fear at that time. We bring in a group of inspiring young alumni who have had some bumps in their own careers. And the final piece of our 1L curriculum is in what we call the house system, which is somewhat similar to GW's Inns of Court. In 2016, the faculty had voted to implement a house system for the purpose of creating greater community. We are a very large law school and we wanted students to have smaller homes. But the house system at that time had no specific content. And so one of my initial tasks as Associate Dean was trying to figure out what it would be. And it seemed like House was a good place to do some of the professional identity development programming that our students needed. So House does lots of things and has lots of programming, but I want to focus today on the way that it provides peer mentorship for 1L students. So I love peer mentorship. I think that it is fantastic for everyone involved, for the mentees, the mentors, the school. Because at Fordham, the Office of Professionalism works really closely with the peer mentors. We know a lot more about what our students are thinking and feeling than we otherwise would. The peer mentors really serve as a bridge and they help mutual understanding in both directions. We have benefited so much from the sensitivity and creativity of peer mentors in developing programs for students. They help us create the content in our materials. They're also able to connect with the 1L students in a way that faculty and administrators can't. The peer mentors are a great source of comfort for them. They reassure them. They answer all the questions that students are embarrassed to ask anyone else. And the personal growth and leadership development for the mentors themselves is really amazing. Our first cohort of professionalism fellows started out very timid and reticent, but we encouraged and supported them, and they really blossomed and matured and turned into really amazing leaders in the school writ large. This is what our peer mentoring structure looks like for the first year. The key piece are these student professionalism fellows that you see in the middle. They work really closely with the Office of Professionalism and the faculty and administrators who are involved with each of the houses. They plan programs, both formal and informal. They lead many of the sessions in the houses. And they're really tasked with community building, organizing social events, other things like that. They also organize programs on co-curricular activities, course planning, using law school technology, and whatever else they want or students seem to need at the moment. They answer questions, they share their experiences, provide information, point to resources. And they are really often the first person that a 1L student with a problem turns to. And they help the 1L students navigate through law school. They're the eyes and ears into the 1L class, and they advocate, sometimes pretty hard, on behalf of their 1Ls. They bring information to us and make suggestions. The fellows have a big job working with 90 students per house, plus faculty, administrative liaisons, and us. And because of that, they receive a stipend for their year of service. They meet weekly with the professionalism office, and they have lots of deliverables over the course of the year. They are the primary motivators for this much larger group of students that we call the BSA student advisors. All the student mentors brainstorm, plan, execute programs and activities designed to foster engagement and community building. Some of them also facilitate some of the August and January orientation programs that we organize. The Assistant Director of Professionalism, who you see here, also oversees the BSA students, 60 to 80 per year. She checks in with them, encourages them, assists them where needed. And I just want to mention that although the Assistant Director of Professionalism is a full-time employee at the law school, she's not a lawyer. But she has a master's in education. And I mention this because so many law school administrators are lawyers, and I don't think it's always necessary. Our assistant director is fabulous. In addition to a lot of informal mentoring, the professionalism fellows and some of the BSA advisors facilitate the modules that we have. And so students see a lot of their professionalism fellows during orientation, both in August and in January, and throughout the year. And you can see on the slide here what we focus on sort of at each point, what's appropriate at each time. So in August, thinking about values, introducing vulnerability, identity. In January, going a little bit deeper with growth mindset, goal setting, receiving feedback, and students involved in everything that happens in-house. For our cautionary tales, we've made lots of mistakes, and we try to solicit student feedback after everything we do. We can't seem to stop tweaking things. The most important advice, I guess, is that student mentors need a lot of support and guidance. They need to feel confident in their role, and to be effective with their mentees, they need to feel like they are supported. One way that we do it is by pairing mentors and putting students in groups. There's a lot of mutual support that happens that way. We also provide a lot of scaffolding, organization, encouragement, and a lot of training. And that really requires a lot of our time, but we think that it's definitely worth it. We introduced the Professionalism Fellows Program to have a handful of very reliable and dedicated students to work with. And we think that we get a lot more out of a smaller number of devoted mentors than a large number of largely indifferent ones. And my last point here is that I think that we learned that you need to be very clear in your own mind about what you want the students to own and make it clear to them what the scope of their role is. I made the mistake early on of working with a group of students without really defining what their role was and what really the school's role was. And I think that that was a mistake. I think that, that our model can give you something to work with if you are in the tight position that we've been in, where curricular change is not really possible, and the faculty are not really willing to collectively assume any new responsibilities, but there are still things that you can do. We're happy to share the basic templates of our programs on the understanding that you'll do the same thing that we do, which is work with your students to make sure that they work for the community that you have at your school. And finally, we hope that you'll come back another time when we will have an opportunity to discuss our upper level peer mentorship program, which we have for second and third year students, which really builds on this. And Jordana and I are partners in all this work, so please feel free to reach out to either of us.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Linda. Jordana, can you remind us how much time do we have left for Q&A?
So this was supposed to run until 5:15. So we don't have much time left, but I think that I know that there were some great questions, and so if the presenters are able to stick around and people are so inclined to stick around, I would say that let's take some of the questions that came up in the chat and any other questions perhaps, for the next 10 minutes or so, if that's okay with people, or until 5. Yeah, so go take it away, Jari. And people.
All right, so we already have a hand up, and I think several of the questions were answered in the chat by our presenters. But I do have two questions that I didn't see were answered. But let's start with, I'm sorry, is it Lyle Baker?
Yeah, it's Lyle Baker. I'm at Suffolk. Okay. I just want to get to the comment that was just made about involving the students and the concept of having the students be the fellows that were just described. What is, in a sense, the stipend and the arrangement? Because students are feeling overwhelmed generally, so you're asking them to carry more baggage and still manage to do everything else they're supposed to do. So that really goes to the Jordana, your team and what's going on there. But the idea of student assistance is really important. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, I guess we have been lucky in that we have had some really generous donors who have been invested in our work. And so, we are able to essentially pay, we do it as a stipend, but this is like a job for our professionalism fellows. Our Board of Student advisors do not get paid. So we expect less of them, but I think that it has been both an important signal to the professionalism fellows at how much we value what they do, and that we are not, and that we recognize that it's work, and that it's a responsibility, and that the school really benefits from it. And so, to the extent that other schools are in this kind of position and, and perhaps have some funds or have donors who are willing to support these things, I think that it has made a big difference in how respected the students feel. I don't think that any of the students apply to be professionalism fellows because of the stipend, but I think that they feel like it gives them the recognition that they deserve. So, it's a nice thing for their resumes, but I think that also, it shows that we know that what they're doing is valuable for us.
So you hire them as if they're for a specific role. So that's really what I'm getting
right.
at.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry. Thank you very much, Linda.
Thank you, Linda. I want to go to hands first. So I just want to slide through here to see if there are any hands before I amplify the two questions that I heard, or rather that I read in the chat. So I don't see any hands. Jordana, if you see any hands, please feel free to correct me. I want to amplify a question that came up around the credits that are associated with these competency, the learning competencies around professional identity formation. So we had a couple of questions actually, where the audience members wanted to hear more about both the credits that may not be included in the GPA, and would also like to hear more about the decision whether to include, not include, and how students react. I thought that was a great question.
So I think that's Wake Forest's classes, graded 1 credit, not included in GPA. And I mean, there's a fair bit of history behind it. I mean, it was 8 years ago. The class was being developed out of the career office. So I don't think there was a lot of confidence among the doctrinal faculty that this was going to be, that it would be appropriate to include something like this in the GPA. I 100% agree with you that, we're trying to send the message that this matters. It was sort of a compromise to reach the graded versus pass fail. Like, we really felt like if this is pass fail, nobody's going to pay any attention whatsoever. So we landed on sort of a middle ground, which was, I don't think a student wants like a C or a D on a transcript that says professional development, or any of these, professional identity formation, any of these classes, that sort of stands out. Like, what did you do in this class that went so wrong? So that was kind of the thinking. It was a compromise. That was what the faculty was willing to go with. I mean, it would be fantastic if we could include it in the GPA, but it just isn't. It wasn't in the cards at the time.
Thank you, Francie. I'm going to go to our last question because we are coming up on 10 minutes over, but I see Marjorie. Silver,
yeah, actually, I was the one who was intrigued by doing it that way. And an advantage I see to it is that students will get an accurate sense of whether they're putting in the kind of effort they need to, or whether there are things to work on. But it's consistent with a growth mindset. You know, this is the very first grade that they're going to get, and to not put it into the GPA, I think they'll take it seriously because it's on their transcript, but they have an opportunity to not worry about that one grade. Anyway, that was my thought.
Thank you, Marjorie. So with that, we're right at 4:25. Jordana, Leah, would you like to make some closing comments? I want to thank everyone, all of our presenters, and you, the audience. Wonderful conversation. But Jordana and Leah, please, if you'd like to close us out.
This was fabulous. Thank you so much, Jari, and all of our panelists. I saw that there was a question in the chat about the May 18th program. It was recorded. I just learned that there's been a little bit of a backlog uploading the recordings to the balance section page, but they will be uploaded shortly, I am told. So do keep an eye out, and we'll ask them to send out an email once everything is posted. But again, thank you to all of you. I hope you join us for our next session, and it's fabulous to see you. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Keep doing the amazing things you're doing.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.